Vietnam vets that happened to be at that to join him and a few thousand of his friends in Westminster, and said they'd be happy to provide dinner to us. That's about the second time we really hooked up. Well, back recently, there was a group, the Benoit Veterans Association, a group that was stationed at Benoit Air Base in Vietnam, and it shut down in 1975. So that meant I was there with a bunch of old people. I don't know why we were there. They were all in their 60s or 70s, and I'm only 47, so I don't know what got me there. Anyway, fortunately or unfortunately, Dr. Trinh was looking for his flight to Branson, Missouri, and they said, oh, by the way, it's going to take an extra hour and a half to get there, and therefore you're going to miss your connection. So he proceeded to do a video for us. So he made a presentation to Benoit Air Base veterans remotely. So coming today, he didn't have to travel nearly as far as he had to do a few weeks ago to do the same thing. I learned a lot about Dr. Trinh as a part of that presentation. I don't know what he's going to talk about now, and maybe he'll expand to some things I told him not to talk about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Dr. Trinh, if you hadn't heard, well, anybody under 60 is a kid, I think, for the rest of us. When he was, well, let's back up a notch. You're familiar with what happened in Afghanistan just a few weeks ago, the evacuation back in Afghanistan of whoever. We won't go into the politics of the whoever. When Dr. Trinh was 5 years old, he and 3 of his younger siblings and his mom walked into a Chinook helicopter at Tan Son Nhut's Air Force in Vietnam. Again, he was 5 years old and 3 of his younger siblings were with him, and his mom. His father was an interpreter. His father was able to join them later. I think I asked, I asked one of the young ladies in the choir if she'd ever been on the Midway station in San Diego. Dr. Trinh flew from Tan Son Nhut Air Base to the Midway, along with whoever else could escape the chaos at that time. So that makes him about 1970 when you were born, give or take a hick. I left Vietnam October of '69. I don't think he was even thought of by then, as were his 3 siblings. So you gentlemen probably served in Vietnam before Dr. Trinh was born. But I told them that the reason they were there is the reason he is here. Dr. Trinh.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invite here, and definitely much closer than Missouri. I'm just right next door in Orange County, and I am here to say thank you. I want to take a few minutes to share those brief memories that I had that felt like it was yesterday. And it was a gray day, kind of like this morning, waking up, looking out. It was a gray day. It was slightly drizzly that day. It was exactly April 29th, 1975. The fall of Saigon was the following day, April 30th of 1975. So it was just one day before the fall. I remember being at the Saigon airport, not inside the airport, but on the runway, sitting on the runway with hundreds of other Vietnamese refugees. I was the oldest. I was 5 years old. My sister is 3 years old. My other sister was 2 years old. Brother was 3 months old, and mom was with us. And I remember it was really loud. Lots of voices all around us. Lots of confusion. Lots of refugees on the tarmac. Lots of American soldiers on the tarmac, and loud shooting noises all around us. Sounds of gunfire, sounds of mortars, because it was a day before the end, they were fighting on the streets, just house to house. And all around us was sounds of just confusion, shooting, loud noises, people talking, people screaming and yelling. And as all this confusion was going on, there were these large black helicopters called Chinook helicopters. Everyone know what I'm talking about? Right? The Chinook helicopters. They were landing, they were really loud. We had no ear protection. It was super windy, right? The double rotors, and we had no protection against that. We were just under that. We did have a white sheet, like a bed sheet, I remember, that we were trying to grab on over our head as the helicopters were hovering above. And these large helicopters were landing probably 200 feet away from us. And as they landed, the back would go down, and I would see groups of people running toward the helicopters, running toward the back of the helicopter, and running inside. And then the ramp would go up, and that helicopter would take off. And another one would land, real loud, real windy. The ramp would go down, people running in, and it would take off. And finally, there was one that landed really close to us. I would say 100 to 150 feet. And we were all huddled like this with this white sheet of paper, this white bed sheet over us as the helicopter was landing, because we felt like it was just gonna blow us away, right? I was a 5-year-old kid on the tarmac. And it was really large, this large machine, right? This just landed. The back would go down, and I was told it was my turn to run. So I grabbed on my sister's hand. She was 3, I was 5, and we ran toward the helicopter. Mom had my other sister in one hand and brother in the other hand. And I was surprised I even made it toward the helicopter, because I felt like the wind from the rotor was just gonna blow me away. But we made it toward the back, and I stood in front of the ramp. On the right side of the ramp was an American serviceman. I couldn't see his head because he had his helmet on, but I saw the pistol he was holding. And there was 2 rows of seats. It was super loud. I ran in, and I remember sitting on the left side and buckled up. And when I buckled up, it was the first time that, even as a 5-year-old kid, it was the first time that I felt hope as a kid. Because my only memory of the war, of growing up in Vietnam, was sleeping underneath our beds. We didn't sleep at night on top of our beds, because at night, when you look outside the window, there were flashes of light. So you knew they were fighting outside. And we were always afraid that the roof of our house would fall down, that in the middle of the fighting, something's gonna hit the roof and the house would collapse. So my childhood, most nights were underneath our beds, and that's how we slept. And I even remember many nights, the Viet Cong, which is the guerrillas, right? The North Vietnamese guerrillas, the Viet Cong at night would do their patrols, and we can hear them walk outside our door of our house, and we can hear the chatter from them. It's interesting because during the day, you don't know who's who. Everybody was a farmer, everybody was a merchant. You don't know who the good guys were, you don't know who the other guys were. But at night, the Viet Cong took their arms and patrolled. And so when we hear the patrol outside, we would always go to our bedroom, the whole family, and we would just huddle in a bedroom out of fear that they would just come in. And I also remember being interrogated by the Viet Cong as a 5-year-old kid. My uncle at the time was the top leading South Vietnamese colonel for the Vietnamese Navy SEALs. I think they called them frogmen back then. He passed on now, but he used to tell me that back then he was training out in Coronado Island, right, with the Navy SEALs. And my uncle was training back there during the wartime. He would come to the U.S., train, and then come back to Vietnam to fight. And so whenever Uncle would come and visit us in Vietnam at our house, and then he would leave, that same day, the Viet Cong would come and interrogate us because they wanted information. Where is he going? What are his plans? And even as a 5-year-old kid, I had no clue. I just remember sitting on my bed, really scared and saying, I don't know, the whole time through this interrogation process. As a matter of fact, we probably wouldn't be around now. Our family probably wouldn't have been around if it were not for the fact that my grandma, who I lived with, my grandma knew one of the Viet Cong guys who was, in the village, and because they knew each other, our family was spared. Those are the memories that I had, which is why I felt hope when I buckled my seatbelt in the Chinook helicopter. And I remember the back ramp closing, the helicopter lifting, and I looked outside the round windows and I saw the city of Saigon as the helicopter got higher. And then I saw the jungle. It was all green after that. I had no clue where we were going, by the way. I didn't even know where, I had no clue. I was 5 years old watching all this, sitting in that helicopter. And I saw blue ocean. I saw the waters, and so we were, hovering over it and flying over the ocean. I was just looking down and I was like, wow, we're flying somewhere. So on April 29th, 1975, this Chinook landed on the USS Midway. And I got off the Midway with my family, with other refugees. I stood on the Midway all afternoon and I watched Vietnamese helicopters escaping the war because these pilots knew that the war was ending. So these Vietnamese helicopters would fly, they would land on the Midway, the pilot got off, his family got off, and in front of me, I watched folks push these helicopters overboard into the ocean. Anyone ever watch those scenes on TV? Yeah, it was right in front of me. Just feet in front of me as I stood there and watched these big helicopters coming overboard. And I even remembered one large helicopter. Maybe it was too large to land. It wasn't allowed to land. I saw it hovering about 100 feet away from the Midway, just hovering over the water. And I watched and saw the pilot jumped off the helicopter and started swimming toward the Midway. And others jumping out. And a bunch of folks swam toward the Midway, and I watched the helicopter just kind of slowly landed in the ocean, crashed, and sank. And that was an interesting experience for a 5-year-old. From there, same day, late afternoon, the rest of us refugees, we were put on the small little amphibious landing crafts, the World War II landing crafts. So we were huddled up in sardines and we left the back of the Midway in these landing crafts. And it was just bobbing up and down the water. I had no clue where we were going. I just knew we just left the Midway. And what happened was the landing craft met in the middle of the ocean with a transport ship. And I remember as a 5-year-old kid jumping from the side of the landing craft and grabbing onto the ropes that were dangling off the transport ship, because they let down these ropes off the side of the ship, and I jumped and I grabbed onto the ropes and climbed up. And the rest of us refugees were jumping grabbing onto ropes on the side of the ship and climbing. And I remember babies. Babies were being tossed from the landing craft to the ship, and people were catching the babies. So we slept on deck of this transport ship for days. We just slept on the hardwood deck. And the best meal of the day was a Ziploc bag of hot rice and tuna, because it was the one hot meal of the day. It was amazing. Still remembered it. So the transport ship dropped us off the island of Guam. Anybody know Guam? Yes. So we stayed in these Gomer pile, half dome Quonset huts, and slept on the racks of the huts, and ate chow with the military. And I stood there and watched planes take off from the airport that was there, military planes, jet fighter planes, and we weren't allowed to enter the United States at the time unless we had a sponsor. And, we didn't have a sponsor because we didn't know anyone in the United States. So we were in Guam for a number of months. One day, we were told we had a sponsor. And we were like, wow, who would sponsor us? Nobody knows us. It was my introduction to God. It was the church who sponsored us. I grew up Buddhist. My mom's a Buddhist nun, my uncle's a Buddhist monk, and I went to school back then in a Buddhist monastery, a pagoda. Never heard of God. It was my first introduction to God. We were saved. Thank the Lord. And because of that, we went on a plane, my first plane ride, off of Guam, and we landed in El Toro Air Base. Anyone know where that is? That's right. 1975. 5-year-old kid landed in El Toro Air Base. These big black buses came and picked us up, took us down to Oceanside, Camp Pendleton. We lived in Tent City. It was a big tent city setup for us. And so I remember sleeping on the cots in the tent city. I remember the rattlesnakes running around at that time. It was an interesting experience. And Dad actually met up with us. He escaped on his own, and Dad met up with us in Tent City. And from there, we moved out of Tent City. We went to Long Beach, lived in a abandoned YWCA. It was shuttered up. I don't know if I was even there legally, but we were there. And our family was there. Mom stayed home with the 4 of us kids. Dad went to pump gas at the gas station as his first job. Somebody donated a bike to us. And because I was 5 years old, I started kindergarten. So I am here because of the names that are on this list. I am here because of the names who are on this list. I am here because of you. I am the result of your sacrifice and your service. Let me just read some names out here. Steve Bowman, Danny Carrasco, Jesse Loback, Jim McGuire, Lenny Nyberg, Tom Teal, Charles Thomas, Ronnie Polaris. Their service was not in vain. I am here because of them. Thank you so much.
Welcome to America.